The morning mist hung heavy over the Scottish countryside as Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell received the call that would change everything. Her phone buzzed at exactly 6:47 a.m., jolting her from a restless sleep. The voice on the other end belonged to Chief Inspector Robert Hayes, and his tone carried an urgency she had rarely heard in her 15 years of service. "Sarah, we need you at Buckingham Palace immediately. There's been a development in the missing jewels case." The line went quiet for a moment before he continued. "And Sarah, this stays between us until further notice. The royal family's reputation depends on absolute discretion." As Sarah dressed quickly in her standard dark suit, her mind raced back to the events of the past 3 months. The disappearance of several pieces from the late Queen's personal collection had sent shockwaves through the royal household. These weren't just any jewels. They included a sapphire brooch that had belonged to Queen Victoria, emerald earrings gifted by foreign dignitaries, and most significantly, a diamond tiara that the late Queen had worn to her own coronation rehearsal decades ago. The investigation had been conducted with the utmost secrecy. Only a handful of people knew about the missing items, and even fewer were aware of the growing suspicions that had begun to surround certain members of the extended royal circle. What had started as a routine inventory check following the Queen's passing had revealed discrepancies that couldn't be explained by simple record-keeping errors. Sarah arrived at the palace gates as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. The guards recognized her immediately and waved her through without the usual formalities. She had become a familiar face over the past months, though her visits had always been discreet, often scheduled during off hours when fewer staff members were present. Chief Inspector Hayes met her in the small conference room that had been designated as their temporary headquarters. The room was sparse, containing only a long wooden table, several chairs, and a large map of London mounted on one wall. Hayes looked tired, his usually neat gray hair slightly disheveled, suggesting he had been working through the night. "We've had a breakthrough," he began without preamble, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat. "Yesterday evening, one of our surveillance teams picked up some interesting activity. Remember the phone records we've been monitoring? There was a call made from Camilla's private residence to a number we've been tracking, a dealer in rare antiques with some questionable connections." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. They had been building a circumstantial case for weeks, but concrete evidence had remained elusive. The investigation had been particularly delicate because it involved the current Queen Consort, a woman who had only recently gained the full acceptance of the British public following years of controversy. "What kind of activity?" Sarah asked, pulling out her notebook from habit, though she knew this conversation would never appear in any official records. Hayes slid a photograph across the table. It showed a man in his 50s, well-dressed but with the kind of nervous energy that suggested someone who lived on the margins of legitimate business. "Marcus Thornfield. He runs a gallery in Mayfair, specializes in what he calls historical acquisitions. We've suspected for years that he's been dealing in stolen goods, but he's clever enough to keep his hands clean on paper," the chief inspector continued. "The call lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Our tech team managed to pick up fragments of the conversation. They heard references to the Victorian pieces and something about completing the collection before the month ends." Sarah studied the photograph carefully. Thornfield had the appearance of a man who had spent his life navigating difficult situations, someone who understood the value of discretion and the price of secrets. His gallery had an impeccable reputation among London's elite, which made him the perfect candidate for handling items that required careful placement in private collections. "There's more," Hayes said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We've been watching Camilla's residence, and yesterday afternoon a small van made a delivery. The driver spent less than 10 minutes inside, but he left with a package that our surveillance team estimates was roughly the size of a jewelry box." The implications hit Sarah immediately. If their suspicions were correct, they were dealing with a theft that went to the very heart of the royal family. The missing jewels weren't just valuable artifacts. They were symbols of continuity, pieces that connected the current monarchy to its historical roots. Their disappearance represented more than a simple crime. It was a betrayal of trust that could shake the foundation of the institution itself. "What's our next move?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Hayes stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens where early morning staff were beginning their daily routines. "We've prepared a search warrant, but given the sensitive nature of the target, we need to proceed with extreme caution. The royal family's legal team has been consulted, and they've agreed to cooperate fully. But they've also made it clear that any leaks could result in a constitutional crisis." Sarah understood the weight of what they were proposing. Searching the private residence of the Queen Consort was unprecedented in modern times. It required coordination at the highest levels of government, and absolute certainty that their evidence was solid enough to justify such an extraordinary step. "The warrant will be executed tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Hayes continued. "I'll be leading a team of 6 officers, all with top security clearance. You'll be the primary investigator once we're inside. Your job will be to locate and catalog any evidence while maintaining the dignity of the search." As Sarah left the palace that morning, her mind was already racing through the possibilities of what they might find. The next 24 hours would determine whether their months of careful investigation would vindicate their suspicions, or whether they would have to return to the drawing board, possibly with their careers in jeopardy. The drive back to her apartment took her through the heart of London, past the landmarks that represented centuries of British history. As she passed Westminster Abbey and the Houses of Parliament, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. Here she was, a police officer sworn to uphold justice, preparing to investigate the very institution that represented the rule of law in British society. That evening, Sarah spent hours reviewing every detail of the case file, preparing herself for what could be the most important search of her career. The missing jewels had become more than evidence in a criminal investigation. They had become symbols of trust, tradition, and the complex relationship between the monarchy and the people it served. The morning of the search dawned crisp and clear, with autumn leaves creating a golden carpet along the tree-lined street leading to Camilla's private residence. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell arrived at the designated meeting point 30 minutes early, her stomach tight with nervous energy. The weight of what they were about to do had kept her awake most of the night, but she felt ready for whatever they might discover. Chief Inspector Hayes had assembled his team with military precision. 6 officers, each chosen for their discretion and experience with high-profile cases, stood quietly beside 2 unmarked vehicles. Sarah recognized most of them from previous sensitive operations, and their presence provided some reassurance that the search would be conducted with the professionalism the situation demanded. "Remember, we're looking for specific items," Hayes addressed the team one final time, holding up photographs of the missing jewels. The sapphire brooch with the distinctive Celtic knot pattern, the emerald earrings with the Maltese cross design, and most importantly, the diamond tiara with the rose motif. These pieces are irreplaceable, both historically and monetarily. The convoy moved through London's morning traffic with deliberate care, avoiding the main thoroughfares where photographers might be lurking. The royal family's press office had prepared a cover story about routine security assessments, but everyone understood that maintaining secrecy would be crucial until they knew what they were dealing with. Camilla's private residence sat behind high walls in one of London's most exclusive neighborhoods. The Georgian townhouse had been her retreat long before her marriage to the then Prince Charles, a place where she could escape the intense scrutiny that came with royal life. Sarah had studied the building's layout extensively, noting the multiple entrances, the private garden, and the separate entrance that led to what staff referred to as the study. As their vehicles approached the gates, Sarah noticed a figure watching from an upstairs window. The curtain fell back quickly, but she had caught a glimpse of someone, possibly Camilla herself, observing their arrival. The gates opened immediately, suggesting that their visit was expected, though whether this was cooperation or resignation remained unclear. The front door was answered by Mrs. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, Camilla's longtime personal secretary, a woman in her 60s whose calm demeanor had weathered decades of royal scandals. She greeted the officers with professional courtesy, though Sarah detected a slight tremor in her voice as she invited them inside. "Her Royal Highness is in the morning room," Mrs. Fitzpatrick informed them, leading the way through halls lined with tasteful artwork and family photographs. "She's asked me to assist you in any way necessary, and to ensure that you understand the house layout." The morning room faced the garden, its large windows filling the space with natural light. Camilla sat in a high-backed chair, dressed simply in a navy blue dress, her hands folded in her lap. At 76, she maintained the composure that had carried her through years of public scrutiny. Though Sarah noticed the slight tension around her eyes, "Inspector Hayes, Detective Mitchell," Camilla acknowledged them with a nod. "I understand you have a warrant to search my home. I want you to know that you have my full cooperation, though I must say I'm puzzled by the necessity of this action." Hayes stepped forward, producing the warrant with appropriate ceremony. "Your Royal Highness, we're investigating the disappearance of certain items from the late Queen's personal collection. We appreciate your cooperation and will conduct this search with the utmost respect for your privacy." Camilla's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a fleeting moment when her composure slipped slightly. It was barely perceptible, a slight tightening of her lips, a brief glance toward the staircase, but it was enough to confirm Sarah's suspicions that they were on the right track. "Mrs. Fitzpatrick will provide you with access to any areas you wish to examine," Camilla continued. "I ask only that you handle my personal belongings with care. Some items have great sentimental value, regardless of their monetary worth." The search began in the ground floor rooms, with officers working systematically through the formal dining room, the library, and the small sitting room where Camilla typically entertained close friends. Sarah took the lead in examining areas where valuable items might be concealed, checking behind paintings inside ornate vases, and within the antique furniture that filled each room. After 2 hours of careful searching, they had found nothing suspicious on the ground floor. The rooms contained exactly what one would expect in the home of a senior royal: expensive but tasteful furnishings, family photographs, and a collection of books that suggested wide-ranging interests. However, Sarah noticed that several display cases appeared to have been recently rearranged, with faint marks on the shelves indicating that items had been moved. The team moved to the second floor, where Camilla's private study occupied a corner room overlooking the garden. This space felt more personal than the formal rooms below, with comfortable reading chairs, a desk covered with correspondence, and built-in bookcases filled with volumes on gardening, history, and royal biography. Sarah approached the study with particular interest, remembering intelligence reports that suggested this was where Camilla conducted her most private business. A large safe stood behind the desk, its door slightly ajar, unusual for someone as security-conscious as a senior royal. When Sarah examined it more closely, she found it completely empty except for a few insurance documents. "The safe appears to have been recently cleared," Sarah observed to Hayes, who nodded grimly. They both understood the implications. If valuable items had been stored there, they had been moved recently, possibly in anticipation of this very search. The master bedroom yielded more interesting results. While searching through Camilla's jewelry collection, Sarah discovered several empty cases that clearly had once contained significant pieces. The velvet interiors showed the impressions of jewelry that was no longer there, and the cases themselves were of the type typically used for storing pieces of historical importance. Mrs. Fitzpatrick, who had been following the search team discreetly, offered an explanation when questioned about the empty cases. "Her Royal Highness often loans pieces to museums for exhibitions," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The documentation for current loans should be in the study files." However, when Sarah checked the files, she found no recent loan agreements or insurance forms that would account for the missing pieces. The paperwork that was present dealt primarily with Camilla's official duties and charitable commitments, with no mention of jewelry transactions. As the search continued into the afternoon, Sarah began to feel the weight of what they weren't finding. The evidence they had gathered suggested that valuable items had indeed been stored in the residence recently, but those items were now gone. The question remained whether they had been moved to avoid detection or whether there was another explanation for their absence. The most revealing discovery came in what Mrs. Fitzpatrick referred to as the gift room, a small space where items received during official visits were stored before being cataloged and either displayed or donated to appropriate institutions. Several boxes showed signs of recent packing, with bubble wrap and tissue paper scattered about as if someone had hurriedly prepared items for transport. Sarah photographed everything carefully, building a detailed record of the search that would be crucial for any future legal proceedings. With each empty case and each sign of recent activity, the circumstantial evidence was mounting, but they still lacked the concrete proof that would justify the extraordinary step they had taken. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah Mitchell found herself growing increasingly frustrated with the search results. Every room they examined told the same story: signs that valuable items had been present recently, but the items themselves were nowhere to be found. It was as if someone had conducted a careful cleaning operation, removing anything that might be considered incriminating, while leaving behind just enough evidence to suggest that their suspicions were justified. The breakthrough came when Officer David Chen, one of the younger members of the search team, made an observation that changed everything. While examining the basement storage area, he noticed something unusual about the wine cellar. The room contained an impressive collection of vintage bottles, but Chen's trained eye caught something that the others had missed. "Detective Mitchell, could you take a look at this?" Chen called from behind a rack of expensive Bordeaux wines. "The dust patterns here don't match the rest of the room." Sarah made her way carefully between the wine racks. Noting that Chen was right, the floor showed clear evidence that something heavy had been moved recently. More importantly, there were scratch marks on the stone floor that suggested furniture or boxes had been dragged across the space within the past few days. "There's something else," Chen continued, pointing to a section of the stone wall that looked slightly different from the rest. "This mortar looks newer than the surrounding areas. If I didn't know better, I'd say someone has been doing construction work down here recently." Sarah examined the wall more closely, running her fingers along the mortar lines. Chen's observation was correct. While the rest of the cellar showed the settled dust and aged stonework of a building that was over 200 years old, this particular section had the clean, fresh appearance of recent work. "We need to get a structural engineer down here," Sarah told Hayes when he joined them in the cellar. "If someone has created a hidden compartment, we need to find it without damaging the building." Hayes nodded, understanding the delicate position they were in. Damaging a historically significant building while searching for evidence would create diplomatic complications that could overshadow whatever they might discover. He made a quick phone call to arrange for a specialist who could examine the wall using non-invasive techniques. While they waited for the engineer to arrive, Sarah decided to conduct a more thorough interview with Mrs. Fitzpatrick. The personal secretary had been cooperative throughout the search, but Sarah sensed that she knew more than she was sharing. They found a quiet corner in the library where they could speak privately. "Mrs. Fitzpatrick, you've worked for Her Royal Highness for over 20 years, Sarah began, adopting a conversational tone rather than an interrogational one. "You would notice if there were any changes in her routine, or if she seemed concerned about anything particular." The older woman shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands fidgeting with the pearl necklace she wore. "Her Royal Highness has been under tremendous stress since the Queen's passing," she replied carefully. "The responsibilities of her new role, the public expectations, the constant scrutiny, it's been overwhelming for everyone in the household." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I can only imagine. Have there been any visitors recently? Anyone who might have helped her with personal business or family matters?" Mrs. Fitzpatrick hesitated, and Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. Loyalty to her employer was clearly battling with something else, perhaps a sense of moral obligation or fear of being implicated in something serious. "There was a gentleman who visited several times over the past month," Mrs. Fitzpatrick finally admitted. "A Mr. Thornfield, I believe his name was. He came to appraise some pieces for insurance purposes, according to Her Royal Highness. But I must say, his visits seemed rather secretive. He always came in the evening, and Her Royal Highness met with him privately in her study." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Marcus Thornfield, the antique dealer they had been investigating, had been a regular visitor to Camilla's residence. This was the first direct connection they had established between the suspected fence and the missing royal jewels. "Can you remember exactly when these visits occurred?" Sarah asked, pulling out her notebook. Mrs. Fitzpatrick consulted a small diary she always carried. "The first visit was on September 15th around 7 p.m., then again on September 22nd, October 3rd, and most recently on October 18th, just 3 days ago. Each time he stayed for approximately 2 hours. The timing was significant. September 15th was exactly 1 week after the palace inventory had discovered the missing jewels, and October 18th was the day before their surveillance team had detected the suspicious phone call. It painted a picture of regular meetings that could have been used to plan and execute the sale of stolen royal artifacts. "Did you ever see what Mr. Thornfield brought with him or took away?" Sarah continued. "He always carried a leather briefcase," Mrs. Fitzpatrick replied, "and on his last visit he brought a small wooden crate, about the size of a jewelry box. When he left, he was carrying what appeared to be the same crate, but it seemed heavier. He held it much more carefully." Before Sarah could ask another question, Officer Chen appeared in the doorway. "Detective Mitchell, the structural engineer, has arrived, and he's found something interesting." They hurried back to the wine cellar, where a man in coveralls was examining the suspicious wall section with a device that looked like a sophisticated metal detector. Dr. James Harrison, the structural engineer, looked up as they approached. "You were right to call me," he said, indicating his equipment readings. "There's definitely a void behind this wall. Based on the construction techniques and the type of mortar used, I'd estimate this opening was created within the past month. Whoever did this work knew what they were doing. It's been disguised quite cleverly." Dr. Harrison explained that the wall contained a hidden compartment approximately 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. The opening had been sealed with mortar that matched the original stonework in color but differed slightly in composition. Enough to fool a casual observer but not sophisticated detection equipment. "Can you open it without damaging the surrounding structure?" Hayes asked. "Absolutely," Dr. Harrison replied. "The mortar is still relatively soft. I can remove it carefully and preserve the original stonework. It should take about 30 minutes. As Dr. Harrison began the delicate process of opening the hidden compartment, Sarah found herself thinking about the implications of what they were discovering. If the compartment contained evidence linking Camilla to the theft of the royal jewels, it would create a scandal that could rock the monarchy to its foundations. The queen consort accused of stealing from her late mother-in-law's personal collection, it was the kind of story that could dominate headlines for months and potentially damage the royal family's reputation beyond repair. But Sarah also had to consider the possibility that they were being led down a deliberate path. The evidence they had found was significant, but also remarkably convenient, almost as if someone wanted them to discover it. Could they be dealing with an elaborate setup designed to implicate Camilla while protecting the real culprit? 25 minutes later, Dr. Harrison stepped back from the wall. "It's open," he announced simply. Sarah approached the compartment with a flashlight, her heart pounding as she peered into the dark space. What she saw there would either vindicate their investigation or raise even more troubling questions about what they were really dealing with. The hidden compartment contained several items, but as Sarah examined them more closely, she realized that their investigation was about to take an unexpected turn. Inside the space, wrapped carefully in black velvet cloth, were 3 items that immediately caught her attention. However, these weren't the missing royal jewels they had been searching for. Instead, they appeared to be documents, old papers with official seals and what looked like several photographs. The discovery was puzzling and concerning in equal measure, suggesting that their investigation had uncovered something far more complex than a simple theft. Sarah Mitchell carefully extracted the wrapped items from the hidden compartment, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The black velvet cloth fell away to reveal a collection of documents that immediately caught her attention for all the wrong reasons. These weren't random papers or personal correspondence. They appeared to be official documents bearing royal seals and government stamps. The first item was a manila envelope marked "Confidential" in red letters, with a date stamp from 1997. Sarah recognized the significance of that year immediately. It was when Princess Diana had died in Paris, a tragedy that had shaken the monarchy and led to intense scrutiny of royal security procedures. The envelope contained what appeared to be incident reports and communication records from that period. "Chief Inspector, you need to see this," Sarah called Hayes over, her voice carefully controlled despite the gravity of what she was discovering. These documents appear to relate to the Diana investigation. Hayes examined the papers with growing concern. The documents included internal memos discussing security arrangements, communication logs from the night of the accident, and most disturbing of all, what appeared to be photographs taken at the scene in Paris. These were not images that had ever been released to the public, and their presence in Camilla's hidden compartment raised serious questions about how she had obtained them. This changes everything, Hayes muttered under his breath. We're not just dealing with stolen jewelry anymore. These documents could contain state secrets. The second wrapped item contained more recent materials, a collection of letters dated from the past 5 years, written on royal household stationery. Sarah recognized King Charles's distinctive handwriting on several of them, though the content was difficult to decipher in the dim light of the wine cellar. What she could make out suggested discussions about managing the transition and protecting the institution's reputation. The most shocking discovery was the third package, which contained detailed financial records showing transfers of significant sums of money between various accounts. The documents tracked payments to several individuals whose names Sarah didn't recognize, but the amounts involved were substantial. Hundreds of thousands of pounds moving through what appeared to be a complex network of offshore accounts. We need to get these documents to a secure location immediately, Hayes decided. This is beyond our jurisdiction now. We're looking at potential state security issues that will need to be handled at the highest levels of government. As they carefully documented and photographed the contents of the hidden compartment, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple theft case. The missing royal jewels now seemed almost insignificant compared to what they had uncovered. These documents suggested a web of secrets that reached into the highest levels of the royal family and potentially the government itself. Mrs. Fitzpatrick appeared increasingly agitated as the search team worked in the wine cellar. Sarah noticed that the older woman kept glancing toward the staircase, as if expecting someone to arrive at any moment. When Sarah approached her for another informal interview, Mrs. Fitzpatrick seemed on the verge of a breakdown. Mrs. Fitzpatrick, I need you to understand the seriousness of what we've discovered, Sarah said gently but firmly. These documents could have national security implications. If you know anything about how they came to be hidden here, now is the time to speak up. The personal secretary's hands trembled as she clutched her pearl necklace. I knew this day would come, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I've been carrying this burden for so long and I didn't know what to do. Sarah led Mrs. Fitzpatrick to a quiet corner where they could speak privately. Tell me what you know, she encouraged. We can protect you, but only if you're honest with us. The story that emerged over the next hour was more complex and disturbing than anything Sarah had imagined. According to Mrs. Fitzpatrick, the hidden compartment had been created not by Camilla, but by someone else entirely. Someone who had used Camilla's residence as a secure hiding place for materials they couldn't risk keeping in their own possession. It was Prince Andrew, Mrs. Fitzpatrick revealed, her voice breaking with the strain of keeping the secret for so long. He approached Her Royal Highness about 6 weeks ago, claiming he needed somewhere secure to store some sensitive materials while his own security arrangements were being updated. He said it was only temporary, just until he could make other arrangements. Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift into a new pattern. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, had been largely withdrawn from public life in recent years due to various scandals and controversies. His request to use Camilla's residence as a hiding place suggested that he was dealing with materials too sensitive or dangerous to keep in his own possession. Did Her Royal Highness know what was in the documents? Sarah asked. Mrs. Fitzpatrick shook her head emphatically. She specifically said she didn't want to know. Prince Andrew assured her that everything was perfectly legal, but that it needed to be kept secure for reasons of national security. He said the fewer people who knew the details, the better for everyone involved. This revelation cast the entire investigation in a new light. If Prince Andrew was the real target of their investigation, it meant that Camilla had been used as an unwitting accomplice in whatever scheme he was operating. The missing royal jewels might have been part of a larger operation designed to fund activities that required untraceable money. When was the last time Prince Andrew visited? Sarah asked. 2 days ago, Mrs. Fitzpatrick replied. He came in the evening just as he always did. He seemed very agitated, much more nervous than usual. He spent about an hour in the wine cellar, and when he left, he was carrying a small suitcase that he hadn't brought with him. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. 2 days ago was after their surveillance team had detected suspicious activity, which meant that Prince Andrew might have been moving evidence in response to the investigation. The fact that he had taken a suitcase suggested that he had removed other materials from the hiding place, leaving behind only the documents they had just discovered. Mrs. Fitzpatrick. "This is very important," Sarah said urgently. "Did you ever see Prince Andrew with any jewelry or small valuable objects during his visits?" The older woman's eyes widened as she understood the implication of the question. "There was one occasion, about 3 weeks ago, when he was carrying a small wooden box. It was old-fashioned looking, the kind that might be used for storing jewelry. When I asked him about it, he said it contained some family heirlooms that needed to be kept secure." The pieces were finally coming together. Prince Andrew had apparently been using Camilla's residence as a staging area for disposing of stolen royal jewelry, while also hiding compromising documents that could damage the royal family's reputation. The antique dealer Marcus Thornfield had been visiting to authenticate and arrange for the sale of the stolen pieces, while the most sensitive documents remained hidden in the wine cellar. As Sarah prepared to contact Chief Inspector Hayes with this new information, she realized that their investigation had uncovered a scandal that went far beyond anything they had originally suspected. They were now dealing with theft, money laundering, and potentially blackmail involving senior members of the royal family. The implications for the monarchy's reputation were staggering, and the political consequences could reshape the institution itself. The search of Camilla's residence had revealed that she was not the mastermind behind the theft of the late Queen's jewels, but rather an unwitting participant in a much larger scheme, orchestrated by someone with access to the highest levels of royal privilege and state secrets. The revelation about Prince Andrew's involvement sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Chief Inspector Hayes immediately called for a secure communication line to contact the highest levels of government, understanding that they were now dealing with a matter that could threaten the stability of the monarchy itself. Sarah Mitchell found herself at the center of what was rapidly becoming one of the most sensitive investigations in British history. Within 2 hours of discovering the documents, a convoy of black vehicles arrived at Camilla's residence. Sarah watched from the window as officials from MI5, representatives from the Cabinet Office, and senior members of the Metropolitan Police's Special Branch emerged and quickly secured the perimeter. The investigation had officially moved beyond the scope of a simple theft case and into the realm of national security. Sir David Harrington, the cabinet secretary, arrived to personally oversee the situation. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of authoritative presence that came from decades of handling government crises, he immediately took charge of the operation. Sarah had never worked with someone of his stature before, and she could sense the gravity of the situation in his every movement. "Detective Mitchell," Sir David addressed her directly, "I understand you've been leading this investigation from the beginning. I need you to brief me on everything you've discovered, leaving out no detail, regardless of how insignificant it might seem." Sarah spent the next hour providing a comprehensive overview of their investigation, from the initial discovery of the missing jewels to the hidden compartment in the wine cellar. Sir David listened intently, asking occasional questions that demonstrated his deep understanding of both the royal household's operations and the potential political implications of what they had uncovered. "The documents you found change everything," Sir David explained. "Some of these materials relate to matters of national security that go back decades. If they were to become public, they could damage not just the royal family, but Britain's relationships with key allies and compromise ongoing security operations." The financial records were particularly concerning. Sir David's team had already begun analyzing the offshore account transactions, and preliminary findings suggested a complex money laundering operation that had been running for several years. The amounts involved were staggering, millions of pounds that appeared to have been moved through multiple countries before ending up in accounts controlled by Prince Andrew and several associates. "We believe Prince Andrew has been funding a lifestyle well beyond his official income," Sir David continued. "The sale of royal artifacts appears to have been just one source of income in a much larger scheme. He may have been selling state secrets, trading on his royal connections for personal gain, or both." Sarah felt the weight of the situation settling over her. As a police officer, she had always believed in the importance of following evidence wherever it led, but she was beginning to understand that this case might be too sensitive for normal legal procedures. The implications for Britain's constitutional monarchy were enormous. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Do we arrest Prince Andrew?" Sir David's expression grew grave. "That decision will be made at the very highest levels of government. possibly involving the Prime Minister and the King himself. For now, we need to secure all the evidence and ensure that no information leaks to the press. A scandal of this magnitude could destabilize the government and damage Britain's international reputation. Meanwhile, across London, Prince Andrew was becoming increasingly aware that his carefully constructed scheme was unraveling. He had spent the morning in his private study, making a series of urgent phone calls to contacts around the world. His hands shook as he dialed numbers from memory, knowing that electronic records could be traced by investigators. Marcus Thornfield, the antique dealer, had stopped answering his phone entirely. Prince Andrew suspected that the man had either been arrested or had fled the country with whatever money he had managed to accumulate from their illegal transactions. The thought of being abandoned by his co-conspirators filled Prince Andrew with a panic he hadn't experienced since his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein had become public knowledge. The prince's greatest fear was that the documents hidden in Camilla's wine cellar would be discovered. Those papers contained information that went far beyond simple theft. They documented years of questionable financial arrangements, including payments from foreign governments that could be interpreted as bribes, and communications that revealed his attempts to use his royal status for personal financial gain. Back at Camilla's residence, the Queen Consort herself was struggling to understand how she had become involved in such a serious situation. She sat in her morning room, accompanied by her legal advisor, trying to process the fact that her brother-in-law had used her home to hide evidence of criminal activity. "I never asked to see what was in those documents," Camilla explained to Sarah during a formal interview. "Andrew assured me that it was a temporary arrangement, something to do with updating his security procedures. I trusted him because he's family, and I thought I was helping with legitimate royal business." Sarah could see the genuine distress in Camilla's eyes. The Queen Consort had built her reputation slowly and carefully over decades, overcoming public skepticism and controversy to reach a position of respect within the royal family. The revelation that she had unknowingly facilitated Prince Andrew's criminal activities threatened to destroy everything she had worked to achieve. "Your Royal Highness, we believe you were manipulated," Sarah said gently. "Prince Andrew appears to have exploited your trust and your position to advance his own illegal activities. Our investigation suggests that you were never intended to be aware of the true nature of what was happening." The legal implications were complex. While Camilla had technically allowed her property to be used for criminal purposes, the evidence suggested that she had been deceived about the nature of those activities. Her cooperation with the investigation and the obvious shock she displayed upon learning the truth worked in her favor, but the scandal would still damage her reputation and potentially compromise her role as Queen Consort. Sir David Harrington's team worked through the evening to analyze all the evidence they had gathered. The documents from the hidden compartment painted a picture of Prince Andrew as a man who had systematically exploited his royal connections for personal gain over many years. The theft of the late Queen's jewelry appeared to be just the latest in a series of increasingly desperate attempts to maintain a lifestyle he could no longer afford through legitimate means. The financial analysis revealed that Prince Andrew had accumulated debts of over £15 million through various failed business ventures and legal settlements. The pressure to maintain his royal lifestyle while meeting these obligations had apparently driven him to increasingly risky criminal behavior. The sale of royal artifacts was just one part of a larger scheme that included accepting payments from foreign governments and using his royal status to facilitate questionable business deals. By midnight, Sir David had compiled a comprehensive report for the Prime Minister. The document outlined 3 possible courses of action, each with significant political implications. The first option was to pursue full criminal prosecution, which would result in unprecedented public scandal, but would demonstrate that no one was above the law. The second option involved a private arrangement where Prince Andrew would quietly withdraw from public life and make restitution for his crimes. The third option was the most controversial: a complete cover-up that would protect the monarchy's reputation but potentially compromise the rule of law. Sarah found herself caught between her duty as a police officer and the political realities of the situation. Every instinct told her that Prince Andrew should be arrested and charged like any other criminal. But she also understood that the implications went far beyond normal law enforcement. The stability of Britain's constitutional system was at stake, and decisions would have to be made by people with authority far beyond her own. As dawn approached, Sarah reflected on how a routine investigation into missing jewelry had evolved into a constitutional crisis. The late Queen's sapphire brooch, emerald earrings, and diamond tiara had been the catalyst for uncovering a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of the royal family. The irony was not lost on her that investigating the theft of items meant to symbolize royal dignity and tradition had revealed behavior that violated everything those symbols represented. The missing jewels themselves remained unaccounted for, though intelligence suggested they had already been sold through Marcus Thornfield's network to private collectors abroad. Recovery would be possible through international cooperation, but it would require acknowledging publicly that the items had been stolen by a senior member of the royal family. Sir David informed Sarah that her role in the investigation was essentially complete, but that she would be required to maintain absolute secrecy about what she had discovered pending decisions at the highest levels of government. The next phase would involve diplomatic negotiations, constitutional lawyers, and political strategists, working to minimize the damage to British institutions while ensuring that some form of justice was served. As Sarah prepared to leave Camilla's residence, she took one last look at the wine cellar where they had made their crucial discovery. The hidden compartment stood open, its secrets finally revealed after weeks of patient investigation. She wondered whether the truth would ever become public, or whether it would join the many other royal secrets that had been buried to protect the monarchy's reputation. The investigation had taught her that the line between justice and political necessity was often blurred when dealing with institutions as powerful and symbolic as the British royal family. The missing jewels had been recovered in terms of understanding what had happened to them, but the broader questions about accountability and the rule of law remained unanswered. 3 days after the discovery at Camilla's residence, the wheels of government machinery were turning at unprecedented speed behind closed doors. Prime Minister Richardson sat in the secure briefing room beneath Downing Street, surrounded by the most senior officials in British government. The emergency session had been called to address what Cabinet Secretary Sir David Harrington had described as the most serious constitutional crisis involving the royal family in modern history. Detective Sarah Mitchell found herself in the unusual position of briefing the Prime Minister directly. Her detailed investigation report lay open on the polished oak table as she explained how a routine inquiry into missing jewelry had uncovered evidence of systematic criminal activity by Prince Andrew spanning several years. The financial records alone show transactions totaling over £8 million, Sarah explained, pointing to charts that displayed the complex network of offshore accounts. The money appears to have come from multiple sources: the sale of royal artifacts, payments from foreign governments, and what can only be described as bribes in exchange for access to senior royal family members. Prime Minister Richardson, a pragmatic woman in her 50s who had navigated numerous political crises during her tenure, listened with growing concern. The implications extended far beyond domestic politics. Several of the foreign payments appeared to have come from countries with which Britain maintained delicate diplomatic relationships. Public exposure could damage international alliances that had taken decades to build. "What's our legal position?" the Prime Minister asked the Attorney General, who had been reviewing the evidence throughout the night. "Technically, we have grounds for prosecution on multiple charges," Sir James Crawford replied grimly. "Theft, money laundering, potentially treason if we can prove he shared state secrets in exchange for payments. However, prosecuting a senior member of the royal family would be unprecedented and could trigger a constitutional crisis." The discussion that followed revealed the complex web of considerations that made this case unlike any other criminal investigation. Prince Andrew's actions hadn't just violated the law, they had potentially compromised Britain's national security, damaged the monarchy's reputation, and created diplomatic complications with several allied nations. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew himself was experiencing the mounting pressure of his situation. He had spent the past 48 hours in his private apartment at the Royal Lodge, making increasingly desperate attempts to contact his foreign associates and liquidate assets before they could be frozen by government investigators. His hands trembled as he tried to access bank accounts that were no longer responding to his credentials. The prince's greatest fear was becoming reality. The carefully constructed network of financial arrangements and secret agreements that had sustained his lifestyle for years was collapsing around him. Marcus Thornfield had disappeared entirely, probably fleeing to a country without extradition treaties. Several offshore accounts had been frozen by international banking authorities, and his attempts to reach contacts in the Middle East and Russia were being met with silence. A soft knock on his study door interrupted his frantic phone calls. His private secretary, James Morrison, entered with an expression that confirmed Prince Andrew's worst fears. "Your Royal Highness," Morrison said quietly, "there's a delegation here to see you." Cabinet Secretary Sir David Harrington, accompanied by representatives from the Metropolitan Police Special Branch. "They're requesting an immediate meeting." Prince Andrew felt his world shifting beneath him. He had known this moment would come, but the reality was more terrifying than he had imagined. For years he had believed that his royal status would protect him from serious consequences, but the presence of such senior officials suggested that those protections were evaporating. Back at Downing Street, the Prime Minister was reviewing the diplomatic implications of their options with the Foreign Secretary. Intelligence reports suggested that at least 3 foreign governments were aware of Prince Andrew's financial difficulties and had been exploiting them to gain access to sensitive information about British government policies and royal family activities. If this becomes public, we'll face questions about what else he might have shared, Foreign Secretary Williams warned. Our intelligence services are already conducting damage assessments, but the potential compromises could affect operations worldwide. Sarah Mitchell observed these high-level discussions with a mixture of fascination and frustration. As a police officer, she had always believed that evidence should lead to prosecution regardless of the suspect's status or connections. However, she was beginning to understand that cases involving national security and constitutional issues operated under different rules than ordinary criminal investigations. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. While government officials debated their options, Marcus Thornfield had been arrested at Heathrow Airport attempting to board a flight to Dubai. In his possession were detailed records of all his transactions with Prince Andrew, including photographs of the stolen royal jewelry and documentation of their sale to private collectors in Switzerland and Monaco. Under questioning, Thornfield revealed the full extent of Prince Andrew's criminal activities. The antique dealer had been working with the prince for over 3 years, initially handling the sale of legitimate items from his personal collection, but gradually becoming involved in more questionable transactions as Prince Andrew's financial pressures increased. He started by selling pieces he claimed were family heirlooms, Thornfield told investigators. But about 18 months ago, he began bringing items that I suspected might not be legitimately his to sell. When I questioned him about provenance, he reminded me of his royal status and suggested that asking too many questions might not be wise for my business. The dealer's confession provided the final pieces of evidence needed to understand the full scope of Prince Andrew's crimes. The theft of the late Queen's jewelry had been just the most recent and most audacious in a series of thefts from royal collections spanning several years. Other missing items included historical artifacts from various royal residences, some of which had been dismissed as administrative oversights rather than investigated as potential thefts. As evening approached, Sir David Harrington prepared to deliver the government's decision to Prince Andrew. The meeting would determine whether Britain would face the unprecedented spectacle of a senior royal family member being arrested and charged with serious crimes, or whether alternative arrangements could be made to resolve the crisis while protecting the monarchy's reputation. The weight of history seemed to hang over every decision. The British monarchy had survived civil wars, world wars, and numerous scandals, but it had never faced the prospect of one of its senior members being exposed as a systematic criminal who had exploited his position for personal gain while potentially compromising national security. Sarah Mitchell's investigation had achieved its original goal. The mystery of the missing royal jewels had been solved. However, the solution had opened doors to much larger questions about accountability, privilege, and the extent to which royal status should protect individuals from the consequences of criminal behavior. The final chapter of this story would be written not in courtrooms or police stations, but in the private meetings where Britain's political and constitutional future was being carefully negotiated. The confrontation between Prince Andrew and the government delegation took place in the formal drawing room of the Royal Lodge on a grey October evening that would be remembered as a turning point in royal history. Sir David Harrington sat across from the prince, flanked by senior officials whose presence made clear that this was not a request but a reckoning. Prince Andrew appeared to have aged years in the span of days. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his hands shook slightly as he reached for his teacup. The man who had once carried himself with the confidence of royal privilege now seemed diminished, aware that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. "Your Royal Highness," Sir David began formally, "we are here to discuss the evidence that has been gathered regarding your involvement in the theft of items from the late Queen's personal collection, as well as related financial crimes that have implications for national security." The evidence was laid out methodically: photographs of the stolen jewelry, bank records showing suspicious transactions, communications with Marcus Thornfield, and most damaging of all, the documents found in Camilla's wine cellar that revealed the full extent of his criminal activities over several years. Prince Andrew listened in silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Sir David finished presenting the evidence, the room fell quiet except for the ticking of an antique clock that had witnessed countless royal conversations over the decades. "I suppose you want me to abdicate my titles and disappear quietly," Prince Andrew finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Protect the family reputation at the cost of my own destruction." Sir David's response was measured but firm. "Your Royal Highness, the evidence against you is overwhelming. We have testimony from Marcus Thornfield, financial records documenting millions in illegal transactions, and physical evidence linking you to the theft of irreplaceable royal artifacts. The question is not whether you committed these crimes, but how we address the consequences in a way that serves both justice and the national interest." The government's offer was stark in its simplicity. Prince Andrew would immediately surrender all royal titles and privileges, submit to house arrest while investigators recovered the stolen items and frozen assets, and cooperate fully with efforts to assess any damage to national security. In exchange, he would avoid criminal prosecution and the public scandal that would inevitably destroy the monarchy's reputation. "If you refuse," Sir David continued, "you will be arrested tonight and charged with theft, money laundering, and potentially treason. The trial will be public, and every detail of your activities will be examined in open court. The damage to the royal family and to Britain's international standing will be incalculable." Prince Andrew understood the choice he faced. His criminal activities had been motivated by a desperate desire to maintain the lifestyle and status he felt entitled to as a senior royal. Now that same status was being used to pressure him into accepting consequences that would strip away everything he had tried so hard to preserve. 3 hours later, Prince Andrew signed a document that effectively ended his public life. The agreement, witnessed by senior government officials and legal representatives, transferred all his assets to a government trust that would oversee restitution to victims and recovery of stolen items. His royal titles would be formally surrendered, and he would withdraw completely from public life under terms that amounted to comfortable imprisonment. The immediate aftermath of the agreement set in motion a carefully orchestrated plan to manage the crisis. Press announcements would cite health concerns as the reason for Prince Andrew's withdrawal from public duties. The missing royal jewels would be quietly recovered through diplomatic channels, with their theft attributed to security lapses during the transition period. Following the late Queen's death, Detective Sarah Mitchell found herself sworn to lifelong secrecy about the true details of her investigation. The official record would show that the missing jewelry had been recovered through routine security reviews, with no mention of criminal activity or the constitutional crisis that had been averted through backroom negotiations. In the weeks that followed, Sarah struggled with the ethical implications of what had occurred. Her investigation had uncovered serious crimes committed by someone who should have been held to the highest standards of behavior, yet justice had been sacrificed on the altar of political necessity. The rule of law, which she had devoted her career to upholding, had been bent to protect an institution that many considered more important than individual accountability. Camilla, meanwhile, worked to rebuild her reputation and restore confidence in her role as queen consort. The revelation that she had been used as an unwitting accomplice actually strengthened her position in some ways, portraying her as a victim of Prince Andrew's manipulation, rather than a willing participant in his crimes. Her cooperation with the investigation and obvious shock at the discoveries had convinced most observers of her innocence. The stolen jewelry was indeed recovered over the following months through quiet diplomatic efforts. The sapphire brooch, emerald earrings, and diamond tiara were returned to the royal collection, though they would forever carry the hidden history of how they had been used to fund Prince Andrew's criminal lifestyle. The items were restored to their places in the royal vault, but their brief absence had revealed uncomfortable truths about the people entrusted with protecting Britain's most treasured artifacts. Marcus Thornfield received a substantial prison sentence, becoming the only person to face public consequences for the entire affair. His trial focused on his role as a dealer in stolen goods, with no mention of his royal connections or the true scope of the conspiracy he had facilitated. The antique dealer's fate served as a warning to others who might be tempted to exploit royal privilege for personal gain. 6 months after the search of Camilla's residence, Sarah Mitchell was promoted to chief inspector, partly in recognition of her discretion in handling such a sensitive case. She never spoke publicly about her investigation, but the experience had changed her understanding of how justice worked when it intersected with power and privilege. The case of the missing royal jewels officially remained unsolved in the public record, listed among the minor mysteries of royal history alongside forgotten scandals and lost artifacts. Only a handful of people knew the true story of how a routine investigation had uncovered corruption at the highest levels of the royal family and how that discovery had been quietly managed to protect Britain's constitutional stability. Prince Andrew lived out his remaining years in comfortable exile, his crimes known only to those who had been involved in their discovery and cover-up. The monarchy survived intact, its reputation protected by the sacrifice of one of its own members and the discretion of those who understood that some truths were too dangerous to reveal. The late Queen's jewelry continued to symbolize the dignity and continuity of the British monarchy, though few would ever know how close those symbols had come to revealing the institution's vulnerability to human weakness and greed. The investigation had ended not with justice in its purest form, but with a carefully balanced resolution that served the greater good, while leaving questions about accountability and privilege forever unanswered.